Electing Olivia Chow, we organized an inaugural ride to her first day at City Hall. It was big news. There were like 1,000 people that came out. But what made it so incredible were the number of women, Asian women, women of all colors that came out biking for the first time on the grounds that, wow, if she looks like me and if she can bike, so can I.
Welcome to That's Her Problem, the podcast where women who lead, connect, and rewrite the rules get real about building community. The challenges we face aren't always the same as everyone else's. But here's the truth. A city that's good for women is good for everyone. I'm your host, Patty Weens. I have so much to tell you. First of all, thank you for being here. I have episodes recorded right till the middle of September, and my plan is to continue launching one episode a week until, I don't know, women run out of problems. Just kidding. Don't worry, at some point I'll take a break, but we're not there yet. In fact, I'm just getting started. And next week, I'll be making a special announcement. So make sure that you're up to date with all your episodes and come back next week to find out what it is. In today's episode, we talk with Ali Stewart, Bicycle Mayor of Toronto. Ali has been working on a personal project, creating space for all women on bikes. Ali is contagiously optimistic in a city under threat of losing some major cycling infrastructure. She talks about that, and at the end of the episode, I'll give you a little update on the current state of things. Ali will be visiting Winnipeg in August, so if you're in Winnipeg, stay tuned and follow me on Instagram at That's Her Problem or my personal Instagram to find out what we end up planning for the weekend of August 22nd. Let's get to our conversation. Ali Stewart, welcome to That's Her Problem. Ali, you're currently employed by Cycle Toronto, and this year you were appointed as Toronto's bicycle mayor, which is how I met you. Welcome here.
Thank you, Patty. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. I always think of these journeys that people have on a bike, and I wonder what got them here, So I'm going to ask you, how did you get here?
So my origin story, as it were, I was raised in Guelph, Ontario. The family also lived in France and in the UK. But ultimately, at the age of 12, 13, I was given a light, pale, somewhat sparkly CCM road bike with a Union light. And that was a game changer for me. I biked, I enjoyed it. My first boyfriend at the age of 14, we biked everywhere. We would bike outside of Guelph to Elora, to Rockwood, to Guelph Lake. And really that sense of freedom followed me throughout university and then fast forward to working in Toronto because biking was much more affordable, reliable, efficient. It kept me happy and healthy and social. When I first worked in Toronto, something like 1992, I biked because it was practical, but I didn't see anyone that looked like me biking in Toronto. Of course, I continued. It wasn't part of my DNA, as it were. I didn't have a social network around biking. But fast forward to 2000, like the mid-aughts, when I became biking a lot more in the city. I saw more people biking. Cycle Toronto was created in 2008. I was introduced to it in 2011 and became a member. But in 2013, that was the catalyst for change where I went from being a member and donor to an active advocate. Because biking in Toronto became stressful, I started to get angry and frustrated, and it was sort of eroding my sense of joy and freedom that I always got and get from biking. And at the time, I was working for an officer of the assembly, and I had an aha moment that really, instead of getting mad at certain behaviors, unless of course they're purposefully aggressive or mean, but to one, focus on what is the legislation, what are the laws, and then educating based on that. and then advocating for change. So I began volunteering for Cycle Toronto in 2013. That is my origin story to taking my love of biking to a cycling advocacy level.
It's funny you say that you didn't see anyone like you because, you know, if you had waited 3 years, I moved to Toronto in 95. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to pay. It was like, I think at the time it was maybe $40 a month for a subway pass. And I was like, I don't want to pay $40. I'm going to ride my bike.
Well, because at the time, for context, for your younger viewers out there, at the time, minimum wage was something like $9 and change. And one ride on the TTC was like $2.25.
You know, as a waitress, I was made, because waitresses or servers made less than minimum wage because of the tips. It was legal to do that at the time. I was making $5.25. So there was no way I was going to spend, 8 hours on a subway pass. And back then I used to take the bike lanes on College. And it was just painted lanes, and I thought it was so great. Look at these painted bike lanes. Why wouldn't I ride my bike?
And today, I mean, honestly, sometimes it's hard as advocates. We sometimes focus on some of the things that are still broken or dangerous. But fast forward to 2024 and today, 2025, College, those painted bike lanes have been upgraded, and it's a dream. And if you're biking on College between Spadina and Bathurst, it's amazing. They're wide, you could ride at different speeds without, getting ringed at or yelled at. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's so great. So you were actually recently featured in Momentum magazine for founding a cycling group called, I'm going to butcher this because I'm not French, Femme Friends.
Yes.
Sorry, correct me,
Femme
please.
Friends. And actually, nobody is comfortable saying that, the term.
Well, no one's comfortable with femme, isn't that the truth?
Well, isn't that the truth?
So the goal is to inspire more women, trans and femme individuals to take to the streets. When did you start this movement? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So actually, the group was founded in 2024, in large part because, as you likely know, in cycling advocacy, especially in polarizing times, and historically, it has been largely dominated by men. And with that comes a bit more aggressiveness, a certain way of holding space. And when you're a woman or someone else that actually experiences more road rage or bad behaviors by others just because you're a woman in a public space, it's not something that necessarily makes you feel comfortable. And I always want to be positive. I want to focus on the joy and freedom because you attract people when it's fun. People want to get a part of that, right? They don't want to get a part of being angry. So after feeling like, I still think in Toronto, while there is such an explosion of different cycling groups and women's groups, that really creating a group, a collective of women that we could just plan social rides to encourage, to bring our friends and people that might be bike curious but don't know where to begin, or even those that have never learned to bike, to create a welcoming, fun space. So all our events have a social component. We meet up somewhere really accessible. We go for a slow roll with music and bubbles. We invite people to wear whatever they want. You might see me wear a banana costume, for example. Natalie, who knows what she'll be wearing. Our end destination, we have a community, like a picnic. We have arts and crafts for the kids. And most recently, and in fact, the big inspiration around creating Femme Friends was really to mark International Women's Day. Let's do something to get more women biking. And so we had our first annual femme-friendly bike fair for the bike curious.
I love
March
that
8th.
term, bike curious.
Yes. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. We had it in a wonderful community space, a Studio 163, which is run by the People with AIDS Foundation. We had 9 different organizations, all grassroots, all volunteer, that had dedicated program for women, femme, and trans. And it was wonderful. We also had, we had a couple of recreational sporting groups like the Saddle Sisters and Gyaldam. We had the Bike Brigade, which is an amazing organization created in 2020 that delivers food to people in need and collaborates with community food groups. We had a couple of do-it-yourself biking groups like the Bike Pirates and Bike Sauce. And we also had Charlie's Free Wheels, which is a neighborhood to my neighborhood in Moss Park that has a program teaching folks how to repair bikes, and they are given a bike at the end of the program. And they also create a social program where they have, community potlucks together, and they do an excellent job of teaching people how to bike. And so we were all in this space. We had food, of course. We also had critical mass that oversaw the arts and crafts table. And it was really an opportunity for women belonging to different groups, different, cultures, languages, just to come out and discover and try biking. One of the volunteers for the Friends for Life bike rally admitted to me when he found out that I had become the bicycle mayor of Toronto, and that part of my mission was to connect people that want to bike but don't know where to start, to give them, a welcoming and supportive environment. He's like, please let me know. I've always been embarrassed and ashamed that I never knew how to bike, and I would really like to because it looks really fun. And he, for example, actually came to the event. And so even though we had about almost a dozen people trying the bikes, it was really nice to see how just as one person with one idea, you can start seeing and building change. So that's the raison d'être behind Femme Friends.
And so how many people are coming out to your events right now?
And again, we're very new. We've hosted a total of 4 events since we began, the bike fair being the biggest, and that's the annual banner event. For that event, we had about 70 people, which is pretty amazing. It was planned with fairly short notice through word of mouth, through Instagram and flyering in the community, reaching out to organizations. But for our group rides, we have between 20 and 30 people.
Okay.
We're taking it one day at a time. So yeah, we don't have a plan to rule the world. It's really just to get as many people to try biking.
So you have about 30 people coming out. Is there a limit to how many people can show up to these bike rides?
We don't currently have a limit. And that's in part because right now we're taking, the first the first year and a half fairly slowly just to see what is the appetite out there. As it gets bigger, we may have to look at that. But right now, I think we're comfortable with having up to 50 for these kind of rides. But that is something we're looking into. And so, for example, also looking at our ride waiver just to make sure that people are acknowledging the behaviors that they need to follow, and to make sure that everybody is behaving as safely and as welcoming as possible.
So you talk about joy and spreading joy, but a movement like this isn't born just out of joy. It's born out of a little bit of anger and frustration that there was nothing like that.
So I like to take the best experiences or inspirations from a wide range of subjects, sectors, experiences. I don't want to focus on, what is frustrating or makes me angry. And for example, during the COVID, a friend of mine and we came across a group called the Toronto Cruisers. And they host, beginning mid-May all the way to the end of August, these Wednesday night bike rides. We meet up at 8:00 at Huron and Bloor, and it's just great vibes with great people. We put lights on our bikes. We encourage people to decorate their bikes, bring music, and we ride everywhere. And it's, we discovered it was one of the most joyful ways to spend a Wednesday night and extend, hot summer nights. And one of the things that's really nice about this group is that it doesn't matter what you do. You don't find out what people do, say, for a living until you get to know someone over a few months, right? The common denominator is a love of community, a love of biking, and a love of enjoying our public space and not having to spend money or go to a bar. And so, for example, I was really inspired by that group. and wanted to add to this growing community of groups and people that just want to gather with like-minded and fun people to go biking.
So who can come?
Anyone can come. And so, for example, that's a great question, because when we first had our first event, we called Femme Friends, we would get questions by people, mostly men, saying, oh, well, are men allowed? Are you a friend of a femme or a woman? Mm-hmm. Then yes, you are welcome. Just because man isn't in our label doesn't mean you're not invited.
We just want to have the freedom of saying it's my table, but you can have a seat too.
Absolutely. And because it's designed for women, we really wanted to make sure that it was a slow roll, that people were comfortable wearing whatever they wanted. I mean, sometimes, and I've experienced this in the past, where people have criticized what I've been wearing biking. You know, because when I would wear high heels, I would wear my outfits. I even, during my winter riding, the best winter riding coat I ever had was this wonderful rabbit fur coat I called Liza, because she was literally the kind of thing that Liza Minnelli or Debbie Harry would have worn in the 80s. You know, white rabbit fur with some gray little rabbit stripes at the shoulders. It was so warm. It was so comfortable. And it was so visible, because white rabbit fur is really visible. And I often got criticized on my daily commute by other cyclists, men, wearing, you know, their Mountain Equipment Co-op biking outfits. And I just thought, that's not really nice. If I were a different kind of woman, I might be put off from, one, biking, and two, changing what I wear.
Right.
So
they're welcome, but they have to follow the no rules rule.
They have to just be, you know, welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and let other people lead or show how to fix a bike, unless someone asks you. And really, the men that come out to our rides, they're wonderful, right? They're part of the cycling community, or they're the boyfriend, partner, or friend of someone. It's awesome. And because it's designed for women, children are invited, right? And in fact, that's why we add the arts and crafts component, right? To make sure that when we're at the picnic, kids can have a little place to play safely and not get bored. So really just to make it a fun community, picnicky feel.
So last week, my guest was Sarah Gravel McKenzie. She is 70, almost 71 years old, and she just started a cycling club for women here in Winnipeg because she was trying to join a cycling club and wasn't welcome at anywhere because there was these rules about the kind of speed that you have to, ride at, or really a lot of ageism. So she says, okay, I'll just start my own thing. And it's become a big thing. So, and she's having a real impact on women. And now a few years in, she's already hearing the stories of women feeling so impacted and so empowered. Are you starting to hear that yet? You're only 4 rides in, 4 events in. What kind of feedback have you received?
Well, so far the feedback, and largely around the bike fair, that was really wonderful, because if you're going to host a party, I feel that the best kind of party is a third of the people you know really well, a third of the people you know well, but some of them are acquaintances, and a third of the people you don't know at all. To me, that's a really great balance, right? Because it shows that you are, building your engagement with the people that you collaborate with on the regular, but that you're also opening up your community, and that's a great sign of growth as well. So that was really nice to see and hear from folks that had come, that had either just seen a flyer, saw it on Instagram, and came to check it out, tried a bike, and said that they were going to try bike share. So absolutely, it's definitely something that there's appetite for, and we're going to see where it takes us.
Good point there. You have bike share in Toronto. We don't have bike share here. There's a lot of big cities that are really investing in their bike shares. How are you finding that that's impacting the group rides? Are people showing up in their bike share bikes?
Absolutely. So bike share has been a game changer for Toronto.
So
really,
jealous.
It has become and viewed as an integral part of Toronto's transportation network. And it's amazing. The growth that they've experienced, over 300% in the past 5 years. And in fact, it's really helpful because it has the data, right? So, often you'll hear people at any kind of consultation about implementing a bike lane. You always hear people say, why would you do that, for the one cyclist that bikes in the winter? Well, thanks to BikeShare's data, it demonstrates that, no, actually, people are biking year round. And
that's just the bike share.
It's just, but the bike share so for example, I have become a full year-round cyclist. 5 years ago, I was not. In part because salt is terrible on your bikes. And so I have a beautiful bike that I love. Her name is La Banane. And I rode her in 2 winters and she started getting corroded. And so I'd be like, okay, so I don't want to ride a bike that I care about, which is impossible. So thanks to BikeShare, I can now ride BikeShare in the winter and in the rain. And it's perfect because, especially in the winter, you sometimes don't know if I'm at the end of my workday, is my bike going to be covered in snow? And so with BikeShare, you're able to change your mind and walk home or take the transit. I feel that every city should have a publicly funded and supported BikeShare program, because it really is an important connector to transit, to where people need to go. And so, for example, in a city like Toronto, at our Union Station, we have an immense options for BikeShare so that people can get off the train, hop on a BikeShare, and get to where they need to go, and vice versa. So,
and they have those super stations at some of the busier terminals where you can just hop on a bike, because they bring extras at the end of the day, knowing that that's where people are going to go.
Absolutely. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah. It's interesting because we were in Toronto a couple of years ago and we were so excited to try out the bike share. I made this whole YouTube video, which at the time got no views, but now it's one of my highest viewing videos, and it's old already, but it's like how to use the bike share in Toronto. And I remember we were visiting with my nephew who lives in Toronto, who goes to U of T, and my kids are around, and my kids don't really ride bikes. I failed in that area for now. They'll come back. But we're sitting around and I'm asking him, hey, so how do you take transit to university? He's like, they have these bikes outside my building now. And I buy a year pass and then I just get on the bike and I just go places. I go anywhere on my bike, and I'm sitting there going, see, kids, some kids are cool.
Well,
and it just makes it easy. You don't have to worry about locking it. You don't have to worry about where you're going to park it. As long as there's a dock, there it goes.
Or worrying about oiling your chain or forgetting your lights. But the point about, so you mentioned that you failed because your kids don't bike. Well, I think, so for example, my parents didn't bike. We all had bikes, but I was the person that took off with it. So I think there's probably a bit of an element to that, because you're such a great cycling enthusiast and leader in the space, they probably, want something that's their own.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay. I think that one day, my goal is that one day my grandkids can say, you know what, we have these bike lanes because my grandma didn't shut up. I don't have grandkids, but that's my goal. Or that my kids say, wow, mom was really ahead of her time, or, which is ridiculous that in this day and age, I'm ahead of the time. But in any case, how can we find out more about Femme Friends?
Our website is femmenfriends.ca, and we are on Instagram.
Well, Ali, I like to ask the question, what does it look like to you to have a seat at the table?
One, that is letting women and others have a legitimate seat at the table, right? So whether it's through having women on the leadership ballot, like for example, having a mayor that looks like you, having, a general manager of transportation services that's a woman. It's really important. So it's really opening up spaces for others, people that have traditionally haven't had seats at the table. I mean, really, despite the fact that women represent more than 50% of the population, we are not represented across the legitimate tables that make decisions about how our streets are going to be designed. And in fact, we're just beginning to see over the past decade or so, as more women get elected into positions, as women with engineering degrees actually get to advance in their cities, to start redesigning and repurposing our streets for others outside of the traditional working man. And so, for example, in 2016, the book that Janette Sadik-Khan, who was the former transportation commissioner of New York City, she really helped rechange the dialogue and how New York City streets looked, right? By talking about and implementing complete streets, by pedestrianizing areas. And really, that marked an important change for North America, as well as Toronto. I remember I ran out to get her book. She was giving a talk in Toronto, and really that was a great inspiration, because so many people, if they haven't experienced something or if they can't see it, they just don't know how to go about, right? So that's some of the challenges that we're seeing in Toronto. So now that Toronto has succeeded in building a connected cycling network plan, we have a thriving bike share, and really it's never been a better time to bike in Toronto. There are still major gaps across the city that don't have the same access to our transportation network, and specifically safe cycling infrastructure. Because part of it, when you go to talk about, putting in a complete street along, say, Danforth and Kingston, they just can't see how that would work in their environment, because that is not something that people think of when they think about the suburban landscape.
I know you and I are so immersed in this, and we just can't imagine that someone doesn't understand. And yet we start talking to someone and they have no idea, because it's not part of their reality. And it's up to us as advocates in our seat at the table to open their eyes, right? To sort of set the table and invite them in.
Absolutely. But it's also making sure that, so for example, whereas, in my role, I take it very seriously. So before thinking about a policy or the kind of recommendations or things that we'd like to ask the city to improve or adopt, it's really important to go out and talk to the actual community to find out, what do they need? What do they want? What are their concerns? And really, how could we connect them better, as opposed to making assumptions? And it's through having those dialogues that you're also able to educate and explain and give examples to show people how this could, how, hey, having a bike lane is going to improve your experience as a pedestrian, as a transit user, and even as a driver. The more spaces we have for the different ways that people need to get around, the more equitable, inclusive we will be as a society. And really, I sometimes have explained to people that when you have right now, when there's no bike lane, it is often a speeding traffic lane next to a really narrow sidewalk. When you add that bike lane, you are getting extra buffer between the pedestrians.
And it slows down the drivers too.
And it slows down the drivers, which is part of the objective. Slow them down. Vehicles have gotten bigger. We need better protections. It's a safe.
And I think that one of the things that people don't realize is the connection between a really highly motorized area or large car traffic and poverty. You're so dependent on your car. You don't have the income to, go out for dinner. Sometimes even you have to make a choice between paying the rent and paying your car bills. I know that that's the life I had to choose, because I didn't know there was a different option. So by providing that bike lane, you are enriching the community. But a lot of people don't see that correlation, and it's up to us to educate when you're having those conversations with the community.
Well, absolutely. But it's also looking at, who do we value when we talk about workers? Often, and it's been really frustrating, our former mayor was on the record of saying, well, if you don't include the food couriers biking on Yonge, there's no one using the bike lanes. I mean, that kind of statement made by a mayor also echoes a lot of sentiments of people. But it's like, well, hang on a minute. Why would you exclude them from anything? And in fact, just a few years ago, you, Mayor Tory, you were hailing these gig workers as essential workers because they kept businesses alive and afloat. They brought food to people. And now you're saying that they don't deserve safe infrastructure so that they can go about their really stressful and ill-paid job. So those kind of perceptions are really frustrating, because absolutely car ownership is a really big part of increasing personal debt that isn't getting enough airtime. But then there's also for those that just will never be able to buy or access a car, right? So anytime that I bike out to Scarborough, I'm always amazed the number of people waiting without any kind of shelter for transit, right? I mean, taking long buses, having to make connections. For people that can't afford a car, your only option is lengthy commutes. And even talking about gig workers, many of them come from afar. I know this because I commute to Guelph to visit my mother on the Kitchener GO train. And I mean, most of them are international students from India, and they're coming in from as far as Kitchener or Brampton. And then, of course, the stress that they suffer. They're not treated equitably by Metrolinx. They're not treated equitably, in Toronto. And we need to do better. Instead of villainizing a type of person or worker role, how can we better support it? Especially when they're part of a product of innovation, right? These private, often traded on the TSX and stock traders around the world, making money off of their backs.
Yes, the greenwashing, right? That I talked about on that episode that's happening in Brazil a lot.
Yes.
Is using those green credits to offset things, and yet we treat them like second-class citizens or, no-class citizens, because we feel like second-class citizens just by being on a bike. Now add that element of the immigrant, the international student, that barrier to entry to any kind of job. We can bike, but we cannot hide. And the world is watching Toronto right now as the provincial government, led by Doug Ford, seeks to remove bike lanes in an attempt to alleviate traffic. And you have a vantage point right now as an employee of Cycle Toronto. We're recording this episode in early May, and we need an update right now. We'll need another update when this drops in July. But tell me, what is going on over there?
In Ontario, we have a premier called Doug Ford. And it should be noted, for those that don't know, his younger brother, who has since passed away, Rob Ford, he was a mayor of Toronto, and when he stepped into office, the first thing that he declared was that the war on the car was over, and basically said, we're not going to let pinko commie cyclists dictate how we get around. And in fact, he ripped up one of the new bike lanes on Jarvis, as well as Pharmacy and Brimley and Scarborough, even though they were just painted lines. And that was in 2012, 2013. Although I will say, with the culture movement, for me, suddenly more people were biking, right? One of the things, and one of the things we could say about Premier Ford is thank you for adding biking to the mainstream. Biking wasn't a main page headline in the news every day of the week. And since his government has put forward and adopted Bill 212, which among other things seeks to remove 3 bike lanes in Toronto, totaling 19 kilometers. So Bloor Street, University, and Yonge.
And for people who don't know, those are the major thoroughfares.
They're main streets that are supported with a subway line, right? They're important corridors for anyone, regardless of how you choose to get around. But really the focus, and which is in line with Toronto's policies around Transform TO, trying to mitigate against climate change and reduce our vehicle emissions, ease traffic congestion. The more people you can get taking transit, walking, and biking, the fewer people you'll have driving. And really, when people talk about accessibility, it's like if the able-bodied individuals that can take active transportation, you're then creating more space for those that don't have a choice or who really need to drive, as opposed to, just wanting to drive because you can afford to and it's what you want to do. And so we have a premier who essentially is focusing on municipal affairs and dictating to cities how they should be rolling out their transportation plans. So in terms of a functioning democracy, it's really disappointing, but he is really determined to remove these bike lanes, despite the fact that we received an injunction who outlined all the right reasons and reasons that the Ford government is aware of as well, that one, removing these 3 bike lanes will likely not alleviate congestion, but they will most likely increase collisions for all road users. The government's own engineering report indicated that up to 46% increase in collisions, right? And collisions impact pedestrians the most, cyclists, but also car drivers. We received an injunction, which meant that the province is not allowed to move forward with removing these bike lanes until the judge makes a determination on the court challenge. Long story short, the government then announced it was going to appeal this injunction. And the Ford went on to a rant at another press conference talking about how, judges shouldn't be allowed to, prevent elected governments to essentially adopt their policies.
Wait. Are we in Canada or is this the United States?
Exactly. Our premier does share certain characteristics as President Trump. He seems to be a fan of polarizing politics. And besides which, the amount of time appealing a court injunction isn't as easy as all get out, right? First, they need to apply by a certain time. They need to get approval by a judge that they will accept this opportunity to appeal. Then reach out to Cycle Toronto's legal team to weigh in on it. And then it needs to go before a judge for the appeal. All that to say, we anticipate receiving a determination by the judge on the wider court case.
Okay.
But it's particularly frustrating because this is an opportunity where the premier could say, you know what, we're going to see what the judge decides. Our interest is in all Ontarians as opposed to personal opinions and polarizing politics. I mean, their own research, the mainstream research, academics, experiences, that alleviating congestion, improving the safety of our streets really hinges on building complete streets and slowing down the movement of traffic, not encouraging people to drive.
Absolutely. And Toronto elected a female bike commuting mayor, Olivia Chow. Is she trying to intervene? What is her role here?
Well, the mayor, and unfortunately, we found this out in the 2018 election when Premier Ford meddled in the municipal election, cutting the size of council in half. That case went to the Supreme Court and clarified and confirmed that municipalities are a creature of the province, and therefore the province can intervene in municipal jurisdiction. Electing Olivia Chow, who is an immigrant, she's an Asian woman, she's a cyclist, representation matter. So this is a really good example of how important it is to have representation at the table, right? Even just the fact of her being in that position. Cycle Toronto organized a ride. One of my professional highlights, actually, we organized an inaugural ride to her first day at City Hall.
It was big news everywhere.
It was big news. There were like 1,000 people that came out. But what made it so incredible were the number of women, Asian women, women of all colors that came out biking for the first time on the grounds that, wow, if she looks like me and if she can bike, so can I. And so
that's amazing.
Just having that representation is huge. In terms of impacting the rollout of the cycling network in Toronto, she is very strategic and she is a negotiator. She's also in a bit of a tight bind. She inherited a situation after, Tory's longstanding mayoralty. Our budget was not balanced. Our roads were a mess. Our like homeless situation has grown. So there's some really big issues that Mayor Chow needs to contend with. And negotiating with the province is really important as well. So I think the conversations that are taking place behind the scenes are probably very different than some of the rhetoric that we're hearing from the Premier. So we'll see how that lands, but I think it's also been a reminder that just because you have a mayor that may believe and want what we want, she certainly has to manage and facilitate that change when you're overseeing, a large city council and all these other conflicting priorities. So I think that's why it's really important to have community advocates that are pushing and demonstrating that there is a demand, right?
I agree.
We need to support her by demonstrating people want bike lanes in their community. And please negotiate, try to find a solution with the Premier.
Yeah, every time I hear the word, she's very strategic, I hear compromise, right? Having to make compromises. I really, really have a thing with that word. But, it sounds like she came in right after the beginning of the pandemic. She inherited a lot of issues, but I hope that just the representation already makes a big difference, because getting more people on bikes also adds to the movement, right? Every time I see a post about what's going on in Toronto online from either Cycle Toronto or Tom Flood or the biking lawyer, it always seems like there's more and more people on bikes showing up to protest. It's almost like Ford said, oh, there aren't that many people biking, and the people on bikes are like, hold my beer, watch this, So has this threat to safety actually solidified the community?
It's not just one threat, right? I mean, it's a threat to our democracy. It's a threat to people having options on how you get around. It's a threat to some people's livelihood. It's definitely a threat to safety. I definitely like a polarizing movement. I think we are going to have an even bigger bike boom this summer. I'm already seeing it on the streets in Toronto, in part because, organizations and institutions that have never talked about biking are talking about biking.
I love it. Yeah. One way or another, we're getting attention, right?
This is a provincial policy that doesn't make sense. So I think we are absolutely on the right side of history. And I think whereas we as a cycling community, we tend to judge success on the number of bike lanes, the quality of bike lanes, but there's also a lot of other bike adjacent things that are really important. Since Mayor Chow's leadership, there's been much more focus on the congestion management plan, which includes, making construction zones safer by addressing some of the really bad driving behavior that actually is a cause of congestion, like people that block intersections, block crosswalks, block lanes, but also, for example, how our bike lanes are being protected year round. So this week, for the first time, the city staff tasked with making sure that the bike lanes are free and clear will be doing so on e-bikes and not trucks.
Wow, that's amazing. I always follow Erin, the
TPS bike parking patrol.
Yes, the bike parking patrol. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it should be on bikes. Don't add to the problem, right? Don't do it on trucks. You're just adding to it.
But also, when you're on a bike, your experience is very different than if you're in a truck.
Different. Here's a new advocate coming up.
You're not going to notice a utility cut if you're on 4 wheels or if you're just looking at something. But if you're riding 2 wheels, especially if they're thin, you are going to notice those utility cuts. Anyway, and or like riding over a branch. So these kind of changes are taking place that are going to support and make cycling more comfortable and accessible for people, even if it isn't as desirable. For example, we wanted to see the rollout of the cycling network plan increase. But that said, even in moments where you may not have the buy-in from the top leaders, there are still a lot of things that are taking place and can be done to continue to grow people biking and to make it a better experience for people that are already biking.
The world is watching. We cannot wait to get, the play-by-play. So thank you so much. This podcast is brought to you by me. I wrote a book called That'll Never Work Here. It's coming out on October 28, and you can pre-order it from wherever you get your books. You can also support me by going to pattybikes.com/podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, tell your friends, and make it their problem too. We've arrived at the section of the show that I call Thank You, Amy, where I ask you, was there a time when you were underestimated and you turned that situation into an opportunity to succeed and even excel?
That is a great question. I would say that all of my successes in life have been a result of experiencing disappointment or challenges. One of the best examples, and it was an opportunity. I was currently working in marketing. I'd been working in marketing and advertising, and I was looking to change my career to be more aligned with my principles and values. And I wanted to work in French again. I felt like my bilingualism was getting weak. And I got this wild opportunity to work for an officer of the assembly. But this role was overseeing compliance and education around the French Language Services Act. Now, I had never worked for government. I had never worked in a French-speaking environment. Heck, I hadn't even spoken much French in about 10 years. I didn't know much about the Act. I was given a 6-month contract. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I was essentially replacing someone who had been working in the field for 35 years and who was Francophone. And I was sort of a fun experiment. And at the time, I wasn't aware of just what a big deal it was. And on one level, I think it was perceived by many as being like a really bad decision on the commissioner's part. I was the first Anglophone to work for this office. And it was such a great opportunity because, one, to advocate for minority linguistic rights, to monitor the government. It was really, this job was the catalyst for my current advocacy around cycling, right? When you are looking to advocate for the rights of people. And so I exceeded everyone's expectations, including the commissioner. So as I did my work, did lots of reading, lots of talking, because part of my role was community liaison and complaints investigations. But the one thing I did know is how to communicate, right? And how to bring people together, right? Through active listening, empathy, and explanation. Because many of our complainants are some of Ontario's most vulnerable individuals. And by simply listening to their needs and concerns, I could advise them accordingly and apply that to the work that the office was doing. Because when you're an outsider coming in, in a sense, you're seeing everything with fresh eyes. And so I was noticing certain gaps regarding our office processes for how to better improve or answer people so that we were getting back to our complainants faster and using a stewardship approach with our government partners on how to remove barriers for people. Because similar to biking, nobody wants to go out in their day to make someone's life dangerous, right? No car driver wants to injure a cyclist, right? A lot of it is through improving systems design and improving the policies. That's how you save lives.
I agree. And look at you now.
Yeah, look at me now. It does help manage and facilitate change because...
Of course, all these experiences strengthen you.
Well, and also understand where people are coming from. Even in the cycling community, trauma lives in the body. And most of us that have been riding for a long time, we have been hit by a car, right? We have had some kind of unpleasant experience. And we know what that's like and how that can impact you. And so when we're having meetings and sometimes people might be communicating their concerns with a perceived aggression, I always remind everyone that we all come from a place of wanting the same objectives to improve our city streets. We are also coming from different experiences that involves trauma. And honestly, when I look at the advocacy of Jess Speaker from Friends and Families for Safe Streets and Dave Shelnut, listening daily to the issues and the road violence out there, it really is hard sometimes not to get angry or to lash out in anger. It's hard. It's ongoing work.
It really is. It really is.
But,
well, we're getting to the end of the show, and I have a few rapid fire questions for you. The first one is a surprise to you. You don't know. If you were a bicycle, what kind of bicycle would you be? I have an idea.
Oh my goodness. I would probably it would need to be a transformer style bicycle. So it doesn't currently exist because
that's fine. Doesn't have to exist.
I currently own 5 bikes. I went car free about 3 years ago, and so I had more space for bikes. I would want a bike that can be adapted to the different kind of rides and events that I'm going to, right? That it could transform into like a cute cruiser, like La Banane, into, like a foldable Brompton so that I could take it on GO Train without being pestered. I would want a comfortable and zippy road bike. And I would also want a more practical hybrid bike with the ability to add a battery to it. So when I'm riding to Scarborough, I might want a little bit of e-juice to help my legs.
It's so funny because whenever I ask this question to someone, they start describing their perfect bike. And then they forget that I said, what kind of bicycle would you be? But it really answers my question because you would be the all-powerful bicycle, the bicycle that can do anything because you are trying, right? You're fitting into all these spaces and you're bringing attention, you're taking up space as a woman in all these spaces, and you're flexible, and you are also have the battery to just keep going.
And also, we also have different moods. Like as humans, we're 360-degree beings.
Yes.
That's
excellent.
That's
great answer. All right, number 2. What is your superpower?
My superpower. Someone the other day told me what my superpower was. And
even better.
So this helps. I was told that my superpower is my ability to put people at ease and facilitate a more common dialogue. Often when you're at community meetings, sometimes they can be taken over by angry individuals or people that want to sort of, harp on a certain issue that's usually against bikes. And my ability to just, calmly ask questions or bring forward something that's to help diffuse that growing tension, just to allow space for other people to reshift the dialogue and go back to the purpose of the meeting. I think part of that skill comes from the fact that as a woman, especially a weird woman, finding ways to insert yourself into a conversation or a space, even a space that you're legitimately at the table. How many times have I been in a room with, mostly men around the table, and you will say something, somebody else, a man, will repeat what you just said, and everyone will go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And so that skill that you learn of trying to bring the conversation around, try to diffuse some topics and advance so that you're actually going to achieve objective that everyone came to the table for.
Can you recommend a book by a female author?
I can recommend 2. Street Fight, the Handbook for Urban Change by Janette Sadik-Khan, written in 2016, for anyone that wants to get into cycling advocacy, road design. It really is a wonderful book to get going and inspired, especially knowing this is a leader in the space who is a woman who has since created space for many others. And on the fiction side, I would recommend the Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, because it's about our protagonist is a woman who works with her dad and others who are lexicographers. They're working in a shed putting together the first Oxford Dictionary, and she discovers how some words are more important than others. And so she begins creating her own dictionary of lost words to better reflect the language and meanings of women. Right? And this is during the suffragette movement. It's a fiction book, but it certainly is very relatable and is a good reminder of where women have come from. If we're still struggling to reshape our streets are still shaped by some of that patriarchal systems that were well anchored in 1901 when this novel took place. So it's getting ready for summer. Put that on your beach reading list.
Well, thank you for joining me, Ali. I love what you're doing in Toronto, and rest assured, it's inspiring women and friends everywhere. I'll be seeing you in Winnipeg soon, and I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise, I look forward to it as well. Thank you for all you do. You are an amazing contributor, communicator, community leader.
Aw,
it's awesome. And I look forward to coming back to Winnipeg. My mom is from Winnipeg, so it's part of my DNA as well as biking.
Well, I think Winnipeg is in some good DNA everywhere.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon. One of the things that our current chair of Public Works likes to say to bike advocates and activists is, you're lucky we're not Toronto. And I don't know about you, but to me that almost sounds like a threat. Is it cool to threaten your constituents to behave or else? I don't know. Tell me in the comments. I wonder if she knows that in Toronto, the advocacy group Cycle Toronto was able to stop the Ford government from removing the bike lanes for now, citing that the removal of these lanes will actually increase car traffic and collisions. But I digress. Please click the link in the show details for an update on this case, or just Google it, as it's a moving target. As I finish editing this episode today, we are unable to go outside due to the high levels of smoke in the air from forest fires. People are starting to call it forest fire season, like it's a normal occurrence. Thousands of people are being evacuated from their communities and are uncertain of what they will find if and when they go back. Yet, our political leaders sign deals for pipelines, talk about adding more car lanes, and make compromises when it comes to bike lanes. Their political careers stand in the way of progress, and I'm frankly exhausted. So today I ask you to pay attention to local politics. Do you know who your city councillor is? Call them and ask them what they're doing to increase options for transportation where you live. Are they voting for or against bike lanes? Tell them how you feel. The most effective way to change our whole world is one street at a time. Thank you as always to my Patreon supporters who keep believing in me and giving me money every month so I can keep going. You can do the same by going to pattybikes.com/podcast. Today I will say their names like a Brazilian mother in the 80s, calling her kids in for supper from riding their bikes around the neighborhood. You might want to turn down the volume for this one. André, Michael, Nikki, Emporio House, Tim, Lucas, Linda, Rodrigo e Julia. Tá na hora. Now, remember to come back next week for the big announcement. But for now, that's her problem.